Hey guys, welcome back to our Corner One, where we are here to equip social impact leaders one day at a time. Volunteers are the bread and butter for all nonprofit organizations, big and small. And aside from staff members, volunteers can ensure that operations of a nonprofit are running smoothly through its programs and ensure that maximum impact is being made. Volunteers can help in many different ways, from helping with coding different administrative things within the office, or tutoring an after school project, or being able to help with a fundraising event. The list goes on and on. And I think it's important to understand not only how to mobilize volunteers, but ensure there isn't a volunteer drop off for the needs of your nonprofit. Volunteers should be able to engage in all aspects of the nonprofit organization as leadership sees fit, while they're able to utilize the skill sets that they have through their personal experiences. So in this video, I'm going to briefly talk about a few strategies for nonprofit leaders and volunteer recruiters to consider as you are thinking about how you want to engage volunteers for your nonprofit. Typically, your volunteers are your family members, close friends, and people that are just passionate about the work that your nonprofit is seeking to do. So it's very important to make sure that you have a plan in place when it comes to how you want to recruit volunteers in the different phases of your nonprofit scale. The first point that I want to talk about is brand visibility and outreach strategies. You can't have volunteers if they don't know what your organization is about and what you aspire to do. Engaging in different marketing and communication strategies for your nonprofit is important so that volunteers are aware of what is out there. Think about some places where you can put out flyers on Facebook, on TikTok, on YouTube, or have a place on your website where volunteers can sign up to learn more about different volunteer positions that are available at your nonprofit. You can also engage with partnering with other nonprofit organizations, especially if your nonprofit does similar work to the nonprofit that you're seeking to partner with. You guys can trade off different volunteers depending on the activities that your nonprofit is putting on. There are so many ways to get creative with seeking out volunteers, but the biggest thing is promoting yourself, promoting your organization, and being clear about the organizational needs. The second point that I want to talk about is streamline onboarding. I have been a part of wonderful nonprofits that are stretched thin, and a lot of times they just literally tell us, come in and help out where you can. And while that is cool for, moments when you are in the beginning phases of launching your nonprofit, it's important to develop a streamlined onboarding process for your volunteers. So some practical steps that you can take is, one, what are the areas of need that you will need for your nonprofit? What are these areas that are more seasonal, meaning you may only need a certain amount of volunteers during peak season of fundraising or peak season of an aspect of your program that you're working on? Or what are the day-to-day operations and maintenance things that your nonprofit will need help in that at the moment you don't have enough staff to support these areas? So breaking it down and thinking about it in an organizational way can help you determine the type of volunteers that you need. People are able to see what it is that your organization is doing and what your organization needs. Once you get the volunteers, now what? You have to train them. Volunteers are not aware of the culture of your organization, especially if they're new and they are just wanting to help out maybe for one seasonal event or project. So it's important to have a volunteer huddle or some sort where it can be a short meeting just giving an overview of what the event is supposed to look like, what it is that you expect of your volunteers, and whatever other pertinent information that you think is important to share. I personally encourage nonprofit leaders to ensure that there is an onboarding process for all volunteers, and what that looks like for your more long-term versus your short-term volunteers is up to you, but there should be some training for your volunteers so they know what behavior they are to conduct and what ways they are to represent the organization. A lot of times nonprofit leaders forget that your volunteers are a representation of your organization organization. So when your people that are your target audience are coming in, sometimes they can't distinguish who is a staff member versus who is a volunteer. So they may have on a t-shirt that says volunteer, but for most people, your volunteers, your staff members, your leadership are kind of all one and the same. So it's important to make sure that you are recruiting volunteers and training them so that they are able to represent your nonprofit well. The third point that I think is really important is to clearly talk about what are your organizational needs. And when you are talking about the needs of your organization, this is something that should start from the leadership team all the way down. If you have a staff member that is the volunteer coordinator, they need to know what areas are in gap when it comes to different forms of operating in your nonprofit. And so if they don't know, they can't clearly go out and recruit and manage the volunteers. I have been in personal situations where I was told that I would be serving in one area, but I end up kind of serving in multiple areas. And for me, I personally don't mind if I have the time to do that, but you want to make sure that you are giving your volunteers a good experience, meaning they know what it is that they're doing, they know the areas where they're serving, how long they're going to serve, and what is required of them during this time. This is really important because this allows for your volunteers to come, and not only come, but this allows for them to return. I have been in a lot of different volunteer experiences, and the best volunteer experiences for me were those that were highly organized. I knew what I was getting myself into, what was expected of me, and what I would be doing and how long I would be doing that specific role during that day. So nonprofit leaders, don't forget to lead your volunteer coordinators, or if you are acting as the volunteer coordinator in the early phases of your nonprofit, making sure that you have a plan and you can understand what it is that your organization needs, because once you are able to understand that, then you can recruit in a more strategic manner to get the volunteers that you need. And then the fourth point, which is one of the biggest points that I tend to see nonprofit leaders miss, make sure you are tracking who is volunteering with your organization. A lot of times volunteers don't realize that you guys still need help, especially if they're coming in maybe through a local church, or they're working with a company, so the company wants to engage with some community outreach and just so happen they're partnering with your nonprofit. Make sure that you have a up-to-date database that tracks all of the volunteers that have engaged with your nonprofit any and every way. You can tap on those people and maybe create a referral system and say, hey, if you recruit X amount of volunteers to help us out with this, this is the benefit that you can get from working with us. There are so many ways to get creative with how you recruit your volunteers, but you also want to make sure you're maintaining a relationship with those that have served. Send out weekly newsletters or quarterly newsletters, just keeping the volunteers that have served up to date on what it is that your organization has done and is doing. And then make your volunteers feel like they have been included. Show some impact data. What is it that the volunteers specifically helped out with that made a change in your organization? Through you serving as an administrative assistant for 2 weeks in our organization, we were able to complete X amount of projects in X amount of time. Through you providing meals with us at our local shelter, we were able to service 50 families in half of time that it would take in XYZ. Be clear and be honest about the help that your volunteers have brought to your organization, especially if you're short-staffed and you don't have a lot of people around you that can help you really effectively implement the operations as necessary. So I want to briefly recap again the 4 major points that we talked about today. We talked about brand visibility and outreach, so making sure that your organization is marketing yourself effectively. Streamline onboarding, making sure that there is a clear process where the volunteers are able to not only sign up, but they are being properly trained and understand the expectations of them as they represent the nonprofit organization. The third point is clearly expressing organizational needs, so being transparent with yourself and your staff members first, and then being transparent with the volunteers as necessary about the areas of need and assigning them as necessary. And then the final point, making sure that you have an effective management system of all the volunteers that you have engaged with, and not only making sure you're tracking their data, making sure that you're maintaining those relationships as best as possible. So these foundational strategies can allow for a diversified group of volunteers to come through your organization. Again, you can have seasonal volunteers that only serve for different peak seasons that your organization needs, or you can have those regular routine volunteers that serves maybe day to day or week to week as necessary. So not only are you recruiting your volunteers, you're able to effectively manage and steward those relationships and retain strong volunteers that can help push the mission forward for your nonprofit organization. All right, that's all for now. I wish you well on your journey as you are becoming the greatest social impact leaders of this generation. Please take a moment to give any feedback, ask me any questions that you have, like the video if you're on YouTube, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please give any feedback if you're watching this in podcast format. Remember that OCO Social Impact Podcast is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so you can listen to this content on the go. But until next time, try to make the world a better place today.